To order. Welcome to meeting number 54 of the House of Commons Standing Committee on Health. Today we meet for 2 hours with witnesses on our study of children's health. Today's meeting is taking place in a hybrid format pursuant to the House Order of June 23rd, 2022. We do have one witness online, so just for our witness online, you have the choice at the bottom of your screen of either Floor, English, or French. And just a reminder that screenshots or pictures of your screen are not permitted. The proceedings will be made available via the House of Commons website. In accordance with our routine motion, I'm informing the committee that all witnesses have completed the required connection tests in advance of the meeting. I will now welcome the witnesses who are with us this afternoon. From Canadian Tire Jumpstart Charities, Dr. Marco Debuano, the President. Childhood Obesity Foundation, Dr. Tom Warshowski, who is with us by video conference. From the Coalition for Healthy School Food, Carolyn Webb, Knowledge Mobilization Coordinator, and from Participation, Mr. Elio Antunes, President and CEO. Thank you all for taking the time to be with us today. Each witness has up to 5 minutes for an opening statement. We'll begin with Dr. Debuano. Welcome to the committee. You have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Canadian Tire Jumpstart is a national charity committed to ensuring Canadian kids have equal access to sport and recreation. Operating through 289 distinct community chapters from coast to coast, Jumpstart creates opportunities for kids in financial need to participate in sport and play, empowering them to achieve their full potential. Backed by a national network of supporters and thanks to the support of Canadian Tire Corporation, which covers all of Jumpstart's general and administrative expenses, Jumpstart has been able to disperse upwards of $300 million to help more than 3 million Canadian children get in the game since 2005. Nous sommes reconnaissants de cette occasion.
We welcome the opportunity to meet with the members of this committee and to underscore the importance of equitable access to sport and play in Canada for the health of our young Canadians. We know all members of this committee share Canadian Tire Jumpstart's belief in the power of sport to provide better health and social outcomes for children and youth of all backgrounds and abilities.
Harnesses the power of sport and play as a tool for social change and the advancement of children's health. One that can be intentionally used to achieve very specific outcomes related to improving child and youth development, the benefits of which include social and emotional well-being, academic performance and participation, reduced youth offending, and improved physical and mental health. The role of sport in these dimensions of youth development has been well documented in scientific literature and underscores how critical sport and physical activity are in supporting the healthy development of children. However, significant barriers exist for marginalized youth to access these benefits. The increasing cost of participation, systemic racism, shortfalls in safe sport opportunities, and lack of inclusive programming, to name a few. When the COVID-19 pandemic stripped away access to sport for Canadian youth and put the country's community sport and recreation organizations at risk, the vital importance of access to sport became clear to everyone. Canadian Tire Jumpstart's 2022 State of Sport report revealed that in the first 9 months of the pandemic alone, 1.5 million children living in low-income households lost over 277 million hours of sport participation, largely due to programs being closed or running at reduced capacity. The loss of access to sport and physical activity had and continues to have real consequences on Canadian youth. For example, our recent research has found that half of parents who say their children play fewer sports also express concern about their kids' deteriorating mental health. 46% of all parents say their children are feeling isolated, experiencing a sense of loss, anxiety, or lacking fitness. Half of all adolescent girls in Canada are not currently participating in sport, a disproportionate number compared to their male counterparts. Sport organizations report that delivering programs amidst COVID-19 recovery is still daunting, with 91% concerned about their ability to provide the same level of service to their communities as prior to the pandemic. 82% are still concerned about their ability to run programs in the future. Il n'y a jamais eu de
There has never been a more important time for the federal government to invest in sport, play, and recreation. We know that implementing a sport for development approach can have significant social and economic returns while improving the health and well-being of children and youth of all ages and abilities.
National leadership in sport for youth development will foster greater collaboration within government and stimulate cross-sectoral engagement in communities across the country, resulting in enhanced impact and improved outcomes for youth across Canada. Sport Canada's Community Sport for All initiative was a very important first step in recognizing the true value of sport. And early drafts of the federal government's new Canadian sport policy also signal a shift wherein sport is used primarily to achieve health outcomes and podium finishes become one of the many byproducts. But to leverage the many health and social benefits of sport, we must encourage national leaders to join us and invest in the future of all children. On behalf of the thousands of community-based sport and recreation organizations supporting millions of Canadian children across Canada, we encourage this committee to call on the federal government to further invest in equitable and safe community sport and play as a means of achieving health and well-being for our youth. Thank you. Merci.
Thank you, Dr. Dubuono. Next, we're going to hear from the Childhood Obesity Foundation. Dr. Warshawski, welcome to the committee. You have the floor.
Thank you, and good morning. One of the most significant risks to the health of Canadians and to the viability of our healthcare system is the current prevalence of unhealthy weights in children and youth. Over 30% of our children are either overweight or obese. And because of the lifestyle habits ingrained in childhood, the situation worsens with age. Currently, over 60% of Canadian adults have unhealthy weights, putting them at increased risk for heart disease, type 2 diabetes, hypertension, stroke, and cancer. Obese adults on average die 7 years earlier than healthy weight peers, and obesity is thought to cost Canada's healthcare system over $7 billion per year. The root of this epidemic begins with the unhealthy dietary habits learned in childhood, and to a lesser extent, low levels of physical activity. The COVID pandemic worsened this situation. Sales of unhealthy food increased. Children spent more time on screens, which commonly market unhealthy foods and beverages to children, and youth spent less time being physically active. While Canadian data is sparse, American studies indicate that children demonstrated an increased weight gain velocity during the COVID pandemic. Having overweight or obesity is detrimental to the health of children and youth and is associated with increased rates of depression and anxiety secondary to weight stigma, increased rates of hypertension and metabolic syndrome in adolescence, increased rates of chronic disease in adulthood, increased costs to the healthcare system, as each teen who remains obese into adulthood triggers an additional cost of $25,000. Obesity worsens health disparities. It disproportionately affects Indigenous Canadians. 87% of First Nations women will develop type 2 diabetes due to unhealthy weights versus an incidence of type 2 diabetes of 46% in non-First Nations women. Obesity hits lower income Canadians harder. Obesity rates are 28% in the lowest income quintile versus 24% in the highest, and impacts rural communities more than urban, with obesity rates of 31% in rural areas versus 25% in urban. Canada needs to take steps to both prevent and treat unhealthy weights in children and youth. However, treatment is expensive, hard to access, and is primarily under provincial jurisdiction. The federal government should focus on effective prevention steps which are under federal jurisdiction. The Childhood Obesity Foundation supports the call for the federal government to finalize front-of-pack nutrition labeling and for the implementation of a national school nutrition program. However, the most pressing need, and to some extent the obvious low-hanging fruit, is for government to introduce regulations to restrict the marketing of unhealthy foods and beverages to children. The remainder of my presentation will highlight the rationale for this important step and is explained in more detail in the brief submitted to HESA by the Stop Marketing to Kids Coalition. 90% of the food and beverages marketed to children promote unhealthy weight gain. And in adults, consumption of these products is associated with ill health regardless of weight status. Persuading children to consume food which will ultimately damage their health is unethical. Most children under the age of 5 years cannot distinguish ads from content, and most under the age of 12 years do not understand the persuasive intent of advertising. Unfortunately, marketing works. It influences kids' food preferences and food choices. That's why the food and beverage industry spends over $1 billion per year in Canada marketing to kids. As a result, over 60% of the calories children consume is from ultra-processed, unhealthy foods. Parents are being outgunned by big food and beverage. We're spending massive amounts to produce sophisticated marketing, which is flooding the airwaves and internet. Many, if not most parents, are ill-equipped to compete. 10% have mental health issues. 10% live in poverty. 15% have poor literacy skills. 15% are single parents. 17% are immigrants, and this percentage is growing each year. Recent immigrants are particularly vulnerable as they strive to embrace Canadian culture. Parents are asking for help, and the overwhelming majority want government to help them keep their kids healthy by enacting restrictions on the marketing of unhealthy foods and beverages to their children. Voluntary codes are not effective, and for the past 10 years, industry has set its own standards and self-regulated marketing. In June 2021, the industry revised their voluntary code. Although the nutrition criteria are robust, the rules of application have significant loopholes, rendering substantially less protection than the regulatory regimen currently in place in Quebec. The new rules would not even prevent child-directed marketing for products such as Lucky Charms. The fox should not be trusted to guard the henhouse. Canada's healthy eating strategy, under its objective to protect vulnerable populations, includes restricting marketing of advertising of beverages high in salt, sugars, and saturated fats to children. This commitment was included in the government's 2015 and 2021 election platforms, the 2019 federal budget, and 4 health minister mandate letters. Health Canada has draft regulations which are poised for implementation. We strongly recommend they be introduced in Canada Gazette Part 1 by the fall of 2023 as per Health Canada's forward regulatory plan. Government need not and should not wait for the private member's bill C-252 to wind its way through Parliament. Implementing regulatory framework to restrict the marketing of unhealthy foods and beverages will positively impact the health of our children and must not be delayed. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Warshawski. Next, from the Coalition for Healthy School Food, Carolyn Webb. Welcome to the committee. Ms. Webb, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and to the committee for inviting me to speak on children's health. The Coalition for Healthy School Food is made up of more than 240 nonprofit member organizations and over 120 endorsers from all provinces and territories. We're advocating for federal funding for a national school food program because schools are ideal places for children and youth to access healthy food and to develop eating habits and skills that will last a lifetime. I know that our members have spoken with some of the members of this committee, and we've appreciated your engagement and support. Across the country, approximately 2/3 of schools do not have a school meal program. We know that many children in Canada, for a variety of reasons, are not able to access healthy foods and that the diet quality of children across the entire socioeconomic spectrum is poor. Studies show that kids aged 9 to 13 get up to 60% of their calories from ultra-processed foods, which is more than any other age group. And unfortunately, when children are hungry or undernourished during the school day, their energy levels, memory, problem-solving skills, creativity, concentration, and mental health suffer. When school food programs are offered, and when they have strong nutritional guidelines in place, they increase children's consumption of vegetables, fruits, and other healthy foods. This has widespread benefits for their physical health, mental health, future eating habits, behavior, and school performance. These programs can also take pressure off of the family budget and help level the playing field. As quoted by the World Food Programme in its State of School Feeding Worldwide 2020 report, all the evidence shows that school meal programs, along with other social protection initiatives, are one of the smartest long-term investments that any government can make. Canada is the only G7 member and one of the only industrialized countries without a national school food program. Across the country, programs reach somewhere between 20 to 40% of children across the spectrum of urban, rural, and remote locations, thanks to investments from the provinces and territories, some municipalities, as well as communities and other contributions. But while many programs exist, most struggle with limited funding, rising food costs, and other pressures. The Coalition is very pleased that the development of a national school nutritious meal program and policy have been included in 2 federal mandate letters, and this followed the commitment of funding for school food in both the Liberal and NDP election platforms. And we hope that all parties will support the inclusion of funding in Budget 2023 as a critical step that can move us towards a Canada where every child in every part of the country has access to healthy food at school every day. Specifically, we recommend the development of a program that serves food based on Canada's 2019 food guide so that children and youth develop the taste receptivity for nutritious foods, gain food literacy, and develop habits for a lifetime of healthy eating by living out the food guide in practice. A national program should provide universal access to students. This means that where a program is in place, all students in the school would have access to it. We'd like to see that the foods served, grown, and learned about reflect the diverse cultures and traditions of students at the school. A national program should not market products to kids, and this would align with the recommendations made by the Stop Marketing to Kids Coalition and the Minister of Health's mandate to put restrictions on the commercial marketing of certain food and beverages to our children, and we strongly support these recommendations, or these restrictions. Food is a powerful connector. A strong program would enable connections between students and members of the broader community and create opportunities for students to eat together, to connect with caring adults, to build resilience, and to feel that they belong. A well-designed program would also include opportunities for students to plan, budget for, purchase, grow, harvest, and prepare food. In addition to funding for a broad program, we're also asking the government to enter into discussions with Indigenous leaders to negotiate agreements for the creation and or enhancement of permanent, independent, distinctions-based First Nations, Métis, and Inuit school meal programs. Since students spend a minimum of 50% of their waking hours on most days in schools, these settings present an unparalleled opportunity to support the health and well-being of nearly every child in the country. School food programs can positively impact dietary quality, mental health, and feelings of connection and belonging. They can improve academic skills and help students acquire personal skills that contribute to long-term success. We urge your committee to take a strong stand on the importance of a Canada-wide school food program and that you'll support an investment in school food in Budget 2023 as a means to support the health and well-being of all children in Canada. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Webb. And finally, from Participation, the President and CEO, Mr. Antunes. You have the floor, sir. Welcome to the committee.
Good morning, Mr. Chair and honorable members of the committee. Thank you for the invitation to speak to you today about the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic and the impacts on health of children and youth in this country, and more specifically, the critical role of physical activity. Imagine if we had, if available to us, a magic pill that, if taken daily, could help kids be healthier, happier, more resilient, perform better in school, and even provide them with a stronger sense of connection with their friends and family. As national leaders, would we not do everything possible to ensure that every child in this country had access to their daily dose? Fortunately, such a pill does exist. It's called physical activity, and the dose is 60 minutes a day, every day. Physical activity is critical to kids' health and well-being because the benefits are so numerous. There are physical benefits like decreased risk for type 2 diabetes and cardiovascular disease. There are mental benefits like improved academic performance and decreased symptoms of anxiety and depression. And there are social benefits like increased self-confidence and self-esteem and a greater sense of developing and maintaining peer relationships. Unfortunately, only 28% of kids in Canada are meeting national physical activity guidelines of 60 minutes per day. Only 28% are getting their daily dose. Even more alarming is that this is a drop of 11% from pre-pandemic levels, and kids from equity-deserving groups had even larger decreases, placing them at greater risk of poor health outcomes. We are only just beginning to understand how the closures, lockdowns, and isolation experienced during the height of the pandemic impacted the lives of children and youth, including their physical activity levels and mental health. The pandemic caused a sudden and drastic shift in the ways kids could access physical activity opportunities. Playing with friends, in-personal physical education classes, sport competitions, and community programming all came to a halt. Kids were moving less and being more sedentary. The pivot to virtual learning and calls to stay home transformed kids' screens from an indulgence into a necessity for education and socializing. Only 18% of children and youth are meeting the screen time recommendations of no more than 2 hours of recreational screen time per day. This is particularly troubling as increased screen time among kids has been associated with depression, anxiety, hyperactivity, and irritability. We should be extremely concerned not only with the impact of COVID has had on kids' physical activity today, but with the long-term public health consequences if we don't take action now. Now is the time to establish cost-effective policies and approaches that will improve physical activity levels and contribute to healthy bodies and healthy minds. It's not an easy task. I spent my entire career in health promotion. I fully understand the roots of our physical inactivity crisis are complex and require a comprehensive and multifaceted approach. A lot has changed over a short period of time. Most of us grew up running freely in our neighborhoods until the streetlights came on, playing street hockey with friends, walking or biking to school. Today, we see how the conveniences associated with our modern lifestyle have led to physical activity being socially engineered out of our lives. That's why Canada has to view physical activity as a necessity of life and one of the most important things we can do for our overall health and well-being. It must be an accepted and expected part of our social norms that everyone can enjoy, regardless of age, ability, ethnicity, income, shape, or size. We must work collaboratively to impact change. No single institution or organization can tackle this issue alone. Organizations like Participation can provide essential leadership and coordination and raise awareness of the importance of physical activity. The federal government should invest in developing and implementing strategies and policies for physical activity that draw from the Pan-Canadian framework, a common vision for increasing physical activity, and continue to support initiatives such as Community Sport for All, which aims to reach and engage those who face social inequities to getting active. Provincial and municipal governments should prioritize strategies to shift intentions and perceptions about physical activity. This includes infrastructure and social marketing to support families in adopting active transportation practices and addressing bylaws that promote and encourage outdoor play. Schools must prioritize physical education as a fun, inclusive, and welcoming subject that develops physical literacy and treat it as important as other core subjects. Manufacturers of digital devices can disclose on product labels the potential harms associated with excessive use, and social media platforms could promote active breaks from screen use. Communities can create accessible environments such as parks, trails, and playgrounds that support physical activity alongside affordable and inclusive programs that encourage families to get active. And of course, parents are an essential piece of the puzzle, as they are the single biggest influence on the physical activity of children and youth. We must look at strategies that also support their own physical activity. The World Health Organization recently stated that there are few areas in public health, such as physical activity, where the evidence on required action is so convincing, cost-effective, and practical. We have an incredibly powerful intervention, a magic pill sitting right in front of us. Let's move into action and ensure that kids get their daily dose of physical activity for better health and well-being. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Antunes. We're going to begin now with rounds of questions, starting with the Conservatives, Mr. Genereux, for 6 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, witnesses, for taking the time out of your busy schedules to join us here today. I think I have a question for everyone, but we'll start with perhaps you first, Mr. Di Buono. I thought was a rather alarming stat. You indicated that half of all adolescent girls are not participating in sport. Does that increase as they get older? I'm thinking our younger kids. Like I think of my 2 adolescent daughters. They're teenagers now. They're not participating in sport, but earlier they were in soccer and some other sports. So is it as they get older? And I guess looking for some of the reason and cause for that.
It's an excellent question. There's absolutely a disproportionate drop-off that occurs as girls enter their teenage years. So approximately 1 in every 2 girls tends to drop out of sport between the age of 12 and the time that they would graduate high school. In comparison, 1 in every 3 boys, that's the latest data we have from Canadian Women in Sport, would drop off in that same time period. They've articulated several reasons for that in their own voice as to why they would drop off, but it comes down to not having spaces and places that are welcoming for their particular social, emotional, and physical needs. And quite frankly, there is a dearth of programming that still exists across the country that is designed specifically to create those safe spaces for girls and young women.
Sorry, spaces and places. You're talking like the physical infrastructure. There's a boys hockey team, but there's not a girls hockey team. Like, is it?
It's a mix of all those things. So representation matters very much for girls and young women. So having coaches, youth activity leaders that reflect their needs, understand their need. They don't have to be women, but at least mindful of the challenges that girls and young women are facing as they progress into their adolescent years. Spaces that are more accommodating for girls and not just, the boys' change room for the one girl on the hockey team, as an example. So it is a combination of the physical infrastructure and other amenities and services that surround the delivery of sport and physical activity for girls and young women.
So it sounds like it's a lot of a culture, I guess, approach that's here in Canada. Are we seeing that elsewhere too? Is that unique to Canada? And I guess where I'm going with that is does a certain amount of funding suddenly help all this, or is something broader at play that should be considered?
It's certainly not unique to Canada. What we have working in our benefit right now is that there is some very targeted funding from Sport Canada, from the Ministry of Women and Gender Equity, from Health Canada, that is helping to overcome some of these challenges. But there's much work that needs to be done there, and particularly further upstream, so that we can really ensure that young girls who are participating in sport, physical activity, and recreation know that there is a safe path for them to progress as they move into their preteen and teenage years and into adulthood.
And is this impacted since the pandemic? Have we seen an even further decrease?
Yes, absolutely. So there was a disproportionate effect on girls and young women relative to their male counterparts during and after COVID. So for a number of reasons. One is boys' sports and programs were prioritized when the money and the resources got tight. And secondly, there were many dynamics within the home environment that prioritized access for boys and adolescent males over their female counterparts as the pandemic progressed.
Okay. I'm going to move on to you, Ms. Webb, from the funding for schools, Coalition for Healthy School Food. You talked largely about schools. I have a little guy in a daycare. There's no food funding for that. Is that part of your request?
Our specific request is for schools from K to 12. We have been speaking with some of the folks working on the child care accords regarding food in the child care setting, but that's not a part of our specific request. It's really limited to the elementary and high school setting.
Do you know the number? You said 2/3 of schools aren't funded by the school food program. Do you know that percentage in daycares?
I don't know the details of daycares. I do know that many daycares do have food. I think daycares more so have a component of food as a part of the daycare service, but yeah, our work is not focused on that. And so
I'm going to the wrong daycare then, because there's no food at or my little guy.
No, exactly.
There's
You're going to daycare?
There was a there is a January 25th, there was a Globe Mail article that published just along this topic that suggested that the rising food prices may be affecting a child's nutrition. And I guess in light of the budget and the budget request, to what extent do you think that food prices are affecting nutrition for kids?
Yeah, and I'll speak again to the school food program setting. Thank you for the question. It's such a relevant question. We've spoken with many of our members across the country and hear that everyone is struggling with the rising cost of food prices, and there's many media reports covering the situation across the country. And what we've heard is that many programs, depending on the circumstances and the arrangements that they Some have had to cut food groups from their meals and snacks. Some have had to cut the quality of food. And for many, they are going to have to serve food less often during the week, or they will have to close earlier. Many could extend their funding until May or June. This year, many are going to have to end their programs come April. I'm sorry. And so it's impacting them in a variety of different ways. But.
Thank you, Ms. Webb. Next up, Mr. Vancouverden, please, for 6 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thanks to all the witnesses for being here and for also joining us online. This is a super important topic of conversation, and we're really grateful for all of your expertise. I'm going to focus the first half of my questions on childhood obesity and the role that poverty and a lack of physical activity interventions plays in the role to contributing to childhood obesity. We know that kids in the United States suffer disproportionately from obesity and fewer opportunities to be physically active and healthy. And most recently, we've heard, as recently as this morning, actually, an article in CBC regarding some of the really aggressive considerations that the United States is considering around reducing childhood obesity with interventions, healthcare interventions like drugs and surgery for little kids. Can anybody speak really to the opportunity of investing more money and resources into kids in their early days, perhaps through their daily lives at school, or other opportunities to be physically active and have access to healthier food, so that we wouldn't have to intervene in a kid's life with a healthcare intervention like surgery, bariatric surgery, or drugs, in order to prevent something which is like, again, so preventable to anyone, really.
I mean, I can start. I certainly can't talk to the.
Well, I can speak to that, Adam. Dr. Tom Warshowski from the Childhood Obesity Foundation. I'm a pediatrician that actively treats children with overweight and obesity. And you're right, the trajectory begins early in childhood. The major driver for excess weight gain is dietary, and that is affected by socioeconomic status. Again, I would say that, especially with all governments, have to be careful with their funding. Low-hanging fruit is to restrict the marketing, restrict the appeal of these unhealthy foods and beverages to kids, but then also to optimize their ability to be physically active and to allow them to consume and develop preferences, as Ms. Webb said, for healthy food. So it is very important to begin early. I think, though, that the major driver for excess weight gain is the food that we eat. And the American guidelines reflect American reality in terms of the politics. They will not implement widespread policies such as restricting the marketing of unhealthy foods and beverages to kids. They are focused on individual behavioral choices. That's the first part of their guidelines. And then they step up to medications, then finally to bariatric surgery. In Canada, we have a unique opportunity. And again, as I said, we are poised to implement a unique opportunity to diminish the role of marketing and diminish the appeal of the unhealthy foods and beverages, which are driving, in part, the obesity epidemic.
Thank you, Doctor. As you're undoubtedly aware, our colleague Patricia Latanzio currently has her private member's bill referred to this committee, and we look forward to studying it. And we know that industry have made some attempts at self-regulation around unhealthy foods and their marketing to children, but it's said that these voluntary codes are not effective. Very briefly, if you could leave me a little bit of time at the end to talk about physical activity, could you tell me why they're not effective, those self-regulatory attempts?
Well, it's a voluntary code. And in fact, when this was studied by Monique Potvin-Kent about 7 years ago, the companies that had not signed on to the voluntary code did less advertising than those companies that did. And one of the primary reasons why the new code that's going to be introduced, I think, next year, won't be effective is there are huge loopholes in how they can advertise. So the example I gave was around Lucky Charms, which is probably one of the most egregious examples of ultra-processed foods. It's sugar with food dyes pressed into appealing shapes. This particular product would be allowed to be advertised to children, direct child advertising to children with spokespersons, cartoon characters, etc. So although there's a few good elements in terms of the guidelines, there's so many loopholes that it won't be effective.
Thank you, Doctor. I'll focus the rest of my time on the Community Sport for All initiative that both Participation and the Canadian Tire Jumpstart organizations have mentioned. This was an initiative brought forward by our government to re-stimulate interest and availability and access to community sport programming across the country. It was actually quite novel. The federal government, no federal government has really invested that much money into community sport programming. It's generally seen as a provincial and municipal priority, but the really stark numbers coming from both Participation and Canadian Tire Jumpstart. The research that you did along with the Canadian Women in Sport organization was frankly too troubling to ignore. So could you speak to some of the initiatives that you're able to fund through these envelopes?
Sure. I mean, I can start. So we're funding initiatives that are associated as part of our June community challenge, where we're mobilizing community organizations to offer up accessible sport and physical activity programming to local organizations. And so we've been able to target organizations who are primarily in the sport and physical activity sector and want to broaden their outreach and engage equity-deserving groups in their programs. We've also outreached to groups that represent equity-deserving groups and have made those connections with programming in their community that they may not otherwise have access to or be aware of. And so we've funded them to be able to put in programs that connect them back into the communities. I think it's been a significant success and much needed. I think it's an opportunity for us to be very targeted in our approach, to be able to address the barriers that those organizations face, and be very customized in the way we deliver those programs.
Thank you, Mr. Antunes. Suite, Monsieur Garon pour...
Mr. Garon, 6 minutes. Thank you very much, Chair, and thank you to all of our witnesses who are here today. I have a question for Dr. Warshawski. In 2017, the federal government led a public consultation on children and bad food, but still there's not been any bill on any marketing on this type of food to young children. But I expect that this may not be an important enough topic for Canadians. Do you have comment on this?
I think it's important. Polling has indicated between 75 to 80% of parents want to see restrictions on the marketing of unhealthy foods and beverages to children. And the government did try to get this moving back in 2015. Conservative Senator Nancy Green-Rain introduced a private member's bill into the Senate, S-228, which had very strong support in the House of Commons, initially had unanimous support in the Senate, wound its way through back to the Senate in 2019, and then died on the order paper. It was filibustered by certain senators and died. That is one of the concerns we have with government waiting for C-252 to wind its way through Parliament. We think it could very likely suffer the same fate as S-228 and die in the Senate. We think it's important that this bill be allowed to go through, and hopefully it will pass. But a parallel track would be for government to implement the regulations, as I mentioned, in the Canada Gazette 1.
Merci, Docteur.
Thank you very much, Doctor. In fact, that is exactly what I tried to express. On the one hand, we have Liberal MPs and ministers who conduct consultations, say it's important to protect children against unhealthy foods, but then private members' bills just die in the order paper. The health department has actually never promoted a bill, and I think you've put your finger on it. On the one hand, we say health is important, but when it's time for the government to act, it never seems important. We have MPs in the chamber say the free market works, you don't need to intervene, and publicity just provides information to children, as if an 11-year-old child can discern between advertising and good information. Can a child of that age distinguish between this kind of advertising and good information?
The short answer is no. Certainly under the age of 5, kids cannot distinguish advertising from content. And even under the age of 12, they don't really understand the persuasive nature of the advertising. And advertising is getting more sophisticated. There was a recent report that came out of the Heart and Stroke Foundation about social media and social media user-generated ads. And these are young people advertising basically to other young people, which is even, I guess, more surreptitious. So yeah, children have a very hard time recognizing advertising. And I would say that from my perspective, as someone who's worked on this since 2014, many levels of government at the federal level have worked towards getting effective restrictions on the marketing of unhealthy foods and beverages to kids. We're somewhat blindsided in 2019 when it died in the Senate. I just don't want to see us repeat the same mistake now. I do not want to see us putting all our eggs in one basket with Bill C-252. The regulatory process through Canada Gazette 1 needs to go forward at a parallel sort of track. And together, if they can converge on a common destination, that'd be great. But if not, then we have the regulations in hand.
Merci. Maintenant, écoutez.
Thank you very much. Now, regarding the legislative process that could lead us to adopting this bill, it's not the first time we try. We know that the processing industry, and I'm not putting agri-food all in the same basket. We have farmers, producers who produce excellent products, but it is a huge industry, and much is at stake with them, and they sell a lot of junk food to our kids. Are you not worried that that industry would do intensive lobbying aiming at some MPs to torpedo these bills that would promote better health for our kids?
I'm not worried. I'm sure that they will. It was effective in killing S-228 in the Senate. However, I believe that the civil servants in Health Canada recognize the data. I think that most parties in the House of Commons recognize the importance of this bill. And I believe that government has the necessary information and desire to move regulations forward.
Thank you. I'm just interrupting you because I have about 40 seconds left. Now, in its own jurisdiction, Quebec has already put in place legislation protecting children against advertising, certainly for under 13-year-olds. And a number of scientific articles have shown that, on average, Quebec children are eating better food than the average Canadian child. Do you think this legislation has played a role?
Absolutely.
Kind of answer I like.
Merci, Mr. Garand.
Thank you, Mr. Garand.
Mr. Davies, please, for 6 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to all the witnesses for being here. Dr. Warshawski, how is childhood obesity defined?
Childhood obesity is defined according to curves generated by the World Health Organization. And it's a little bit complicated, but it's actually reasoning backwards, extrapolating backwards from those BMI criteria, which in adulthood, say above the age of 19 years, are associated with an increased risk of chronic diseases and higher rates of mortality. And then reasoning backwards or extrapolating backwards from that curve, from those curve points. So overweight in adults defined as a BMI above 25 to 30, and obesity above 30. So reasoning backwards on these growth curves, we can look and see if a child's above the 85th percentile for their BMI at a given age, they're categorized as overweight. And if they're above the 97th centile, they're categorized as being obese.
Now, from my reading of the literature investigating obesity stigma, most of that is focused on adults living with obesity. How does obesity stigma affect children and their families?
Oh, it affects them quite severely, actually. There's a study, probably it's 10 years old or older now. Children living with obesity rate the quality of their lives lower than children who are undergoing chemotherapy for cancer. Obesity, stigma against obesity, bias against obesity is one of the last publicly acceptable prejudices. It is that status of being overweight or obese is erroneously linked with gluttony and sloth and self-indulgence, whereas in fact it's a confluence of genetics and the obesogenic environment we have. I have in my practice many children who have cried when they are placed on the scale and asked so I can get their BMI. They are so self-conscious about their weight. They are getting teased in class relentlessly. And it's this sort of state is linked with depression and anxiety in children.
Now, anecdotally, I think we all kind of think and see that there's greater obesity in children today than it was in the past. Can you give us a little bit of math around that, about the trajectory? Is childhood obesity increasing?
Yes. So back in 1978, the incidence of childhood obesity was around 6%. Now it's around 12%. So it's increased significantly. It's doubled. The incidence of total overweight and obesity was around 23%. Now it's 31%. It actually seemed to peak around 2004, and we've had a slight drop in the levels of overweight and obesity. That may be in part due to, I think, better regulations in school around the marketing of unhealthy foods and beverages to kids and sales of these products. We also seen the sales of sugary drinks dropping a little bit in the last say decade or so. However, having said that, the overall numbers are still quite significant and they need to be addressed.
Outline the impact that sugary beverage taxes have had on childhood obesity in jurisdictions that have implemented them to date, and would it be your recommendation that Canada implement such a tax?
Taxes on sugar-sweetened beverages are an effective policy lever to decrease the purchase and consumption of these products. I think the evidence is quite strong from jurisdictions in the States, different municipalities that have introduced them, and Mexico. To actually see the change in the rate of overweight and obesity is something that's going to be sort of downstream yet. It's going to probably take 5 to 10 years to see this, but short-term studies in adolescents show that reducing the intake of sugar-sweetened beverages is important. In terms of a policy lever, it is something that the federal government, I think, should consider. It wasn't the focus of my conversation today, but again, because I think that we are shovel ready for restricting the marketing of unhealthy foods and beverages to kids. Interestingly enough, Newfoundland has just introduced this, a particular tax on sugary drinks. I believe that came into place in September. It's going to take a while to see how this unfolds. But one of the reasons or rationales to have a tax is to generate income to help fund programs such as school nutrition programs. When I appear before this committee, where I think we all realize government has lots of asks and only a limited budget, and there's only one taxpayer. When we think about putting in new programs with costs, we also have to think about how it could be funded. A tax on sugary drinks would be a great way to fund these types of nutrition programs.
How much time do you have, Mr. Chair?
1 minute.
Thanks. Ms. Webb, given that Canada is the only G7 nation without a national school food program, what international best practices could we incorporate into the development of a national school food program in our country?
Yeah, thanks for this question. And in a way, we have an advantage because we have so many other countries to learn from. There are many countries that really involve the students in preparing and serving the food. There's other countries, Japan and France are some great examples of those that really involve the kids in the whole culture of eating and teach many life skills through that. Brazil has a 30% local food procurement target that supports family farmers and really creates local economies. There are many countries that really involve students in those life skills development, and so there's a lot of different pieces to touch on, as well as health standards and other things. So many different lessons that we can learn on. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Webb. Next, Ms. Ferrari. Welcome to the committee. I guess we're on the same circuit today. You have the floor for 5 minutes.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Mr. Chair, and thank you to my colleague, Dr. Ellis, for letting me sit in today. There's a lot of overlap in what I'm studying in my other committee on status of women and abuse in sport and mental health in children. So great testimony today to hear from all of the witnesses. I'd like to start with Dr., and I'm not going to pronounce your last name correctly, so Warshawski?
Perfect.
Thank you. What I find kind of interesting about this conversation and your experience, obviously you're a pediatrician and a doctor, Do you find that obesity is a symptom for something bigger for a child who may be dealing with mental health or other issues?
Sometimes it's bidirectional. I would characterize it as sometimes just due to genetics and the obesogenic environment, unhealthy weights develop, and then as a result of stigma, mental health deteriorates. But in other times, certainly children that have been subject to child maltreatment, sexual abuse, physical abuse, that sort of thing, children with biologic tendencies to depression or anxiety can also use food for solace. So I don't think it's difficult to make categorical statements. You have to go individually.
Thanks for that. I'd love to see data, and I don't know if you have any to table to the committee around this. I know when we look at sort of the work of Dr. Stuart Shanker or self-regulation, and we look at sort of overeating or using eating as a self-regulating technique, it is often there is a big chunk there, but I understand what you're saying. It is absolutely individual. I guess where I'm going with this line of questioning, Doctor, is would it not be valuable to really look at investing in access to mental health supports for kids when we see, as we've heard in this testimony today, how deteriorated children's mental health is? There was a promise of $4.5 billion from the Liberal government of a Canada mental health transfer, and we haven't seen any of that. Would that not be significantly beneficial to be added? I know we're talking about marketing, and that's important, but wouldn't it be beneficial to understand the underlying cause of what food does to our body and educating kids so they best understand it? Because we also have a rise in eating disorders in young girls and young men as well.
Okay, I'll try to unpack that. Eating disorders have increased in prevalence, but they're still dwarfed by the incidence of unhealthy overweight and obesity. Mental health is hugely important. I would say that 80% of my practice is anxiety, depression, autism, ADHD. So it's out there. It's a big cause of morbidity. Looking at the temporal relationship between the increase in unhealthy weights in children and youth in Canada since, say, 1975, it's best explained by changes in the food environment, not in the mental health environment. So that's not to say that mental health isn't extremely important. It is. You also mentioned, educating kids. We know that media literacy doesn't work. We know that kids are credulous. They tend to believe what they're told, and they certainly would never guess that that these colorful ads on TV are actually for foods that are unhealthy. So I would disconnect those two. I think that the pursuit of better mental health care is vitally important, and it should begin with prenatal classes, should begin with the parents. It's really, really important. That should proceed on a separate track and should be uncoupled from other efforts to increase or to improve the food environment. And also, I don't want to at all seem to say that I'm disparaging the role of physical activity. As the speaker said, from Jumpstart and Participation, physical activity is so important for mental health, so important for fitness, but it's not the major lever to affect unhealthy weights.
Sorry, did you say media literacy doesn't work? Is that what you said?
Correct.
Can you explain that? Why doesn't media literacy, if you're educating people through the media, I don't understand what you're saying there.
Media literacy for children has not proven to be effective at all. The media literacy messages are kind of staid, boring, brief, and they pale in comparison to the pizzazz and sizzle of advertising.
Thank you for that. Ms. Weber, if I may, is it Weber? Sorry, Ms. Webb. Sorry, thank you, Ms. Webb. Great programs in terms of children having access to food in school for especially those most vulnerable. Do you have any data or statistics on how many school food programs are championed by strictly like parent groups as opposed to an organization like yours?
Don't have any data specifically because we don't have a national program. We also don't have a national data bank of exactly who's running the programs. But in speaking, we have 240 member organizations, and all of them are organizations. Most programs are run, from what I've seen, by either organizations. Some are run by school districts. There are some parent communities that come together to run something like a salad bar or a hot lunch program. And And so I think what we've seen across the country is people making do with what they can with the people who come forward with resources and time. And so, yeah, we do have parent communities that come together to serve food. Maybe they can only do once a week, or maybe they can just do 20 times in a year, but they will do that. And then there are kind of hot lunch programs, or people bringing food from the outside, doing catering services through the parent school council. And so I think all the models do exist. I would say more common to have the organizations serving like solid meal programs, but yeah, there's such a range of models, and a lot has to do with the nuances of the communities and if there's active parents or not. And so, yeah, they do exist. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Webb, Ms. Ferrari. Next, Dr. Hanley, please, for 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, and thanks to all of the witnesses for the really interesting testimony. Dr. Warshawski, I'd like to start with you, if I may, and I think you've made it pretty clear from a policy perspective what we could do in terms of marketing with what you mentioned, really putting into force what's already in the Gazette. In addition to anything that Bill C-252 may add. But maybe expanding on or moving beyond what we should be doing in restricting marketing, I wanted to, and maybe picking up a bit on the literacy from Ms. Ferrari's questions, but this is really about nutritional literacy. How do we get better at, like, as a physician, I don't think I was at all well educated in nutrition and what to say, what to advise. And most of what I've learned has been in the reading that I've taken on. So there's I think health practitioner literacy, but also general literacy, for parents, for guiding the children, for knowing when there's such burgeoning literature and media on nutrition, and yet some of the kernels of just good basic eating practices can be missed. I wonder if you could comment on how we could, from a policy point of view, do better in nutritional literacy.
I like to use the term kernel because it gets back to, I think, keeping it simple. Like you as a physician who don't know much about nutrition, I think that there's more and more awareness that talking about calories, talking about carbohydrates, talking about particular components, just people gloss over with this. And really, we're talking about whole foods. It's purchasing, cooking whole foods at home. That's the basis of food literacy. We know more and more that the strongest link with ill health with food consumption is with ultra-processed foods. So getting to sort of the Brazilian style of the whole plate, the new the Canada the food guide healthy plate is also a good model for that. I think we have to sort of simplify things to some extent and focus on whole foods that your grandmother or great grandmother would recognize as a food that's not ultra-processed. Cooking and eating at home together is strongly associated with good dietary habits. Those foundational things, staying away from added simple sugars. They can be done. You can have your simple sugars once or twice a week, but not every day. You don't really want to demonize foods. But on the other hand, what some of the dietitians call common sense around foods, it isn't that common. There's a lot of people now that don't parents that don't cook food, and their children don't know how to cook food. So getting back to some basics, that's almost to simplify things.
Thank you. And on a related theme, I'd like to move briefly to you, Ms. Webb. And thanks for appearing. Now, you talk about in your website anyway about successful cases locally and in Canada about school-based food programs. I know that in the Yukon we have some First Nations initiatives that seem to be successful also in linking to local food. But I wonder, particularly from a rural northern perspective, you can talk about maybe good models in our country that we can build on.
Yeah, thank you. And when you talked about good models, I was actually going to speak to the Yukon. The Yukon First Nations Education Directorate has an excellent program which feeds students and also involves local caterers to provide country foods for students, and is quite an extensive program that we do reference often. Newfoundland and Labrador, their school lunch association has a program. They use a pay what you can model, but it's one where families can pay and use a software so that students aren't stigmatized. They can pay whatever they can across from nothing to what they can afford, and then their kids are provided a hot lunch at school during the day that's produced from local caterers. There are a number of different models that we can see just in different regions. Some regions have really strong breakfast programs. For instance, Nova Scotia feeds 95% of schools receive breakfast, is my understanding, at school. And so I think that we do have a diversity of really great models that we can learn from and kind of figure out what's the best of all of these. There are some really innovative, what are sometimes referred to as farm-to-school models, where it involves, local farmers or food producers or harvesters bringing food to the school and engaging with the children, producing the food and then serving it. And so thank you for referring to it. We do have some excellent models that we can grow and support and expand.
Thank you, Ms.
Thank
Webb.
you.
Suite, Monsieur Garand pour
Mr. Garand, 2.5 minutes. Thank you, Chair. Mr. Dubono, I'm very interested in how government can finance initiatives that will benefit children to do sports. At the time of Harper government, we had a tax credit, and it had no effect on sports. It was aggressive. It actually put money in the hands of wealthy families. Now, the Liberal approach has been to enhance the child benefit, to try to put money directly in the pockets of families. The Bloc Québécois believes the school needs to play a role. These need to be better financed. We have a national program in Quebec. Now, do you think that is part of the federal government toolbox when there's money transferred to the provinces, to Quebec, that they be able to finance sports initiatives? It's a good question, and I'd rather answer in English to be clearer.
I think it's very important to recognize that schools are one of the many locations within the community ecosystem that play an important role in providing opportunities for children and youth to access sport, physical activity, and recreation. But they also include municipal parks and recreation organizations, youth-serving organizations, local sport clubs. The mechanism that was employed for community sport for all, identifying national organizations like Participation, Jumpstart, and many, many others, to really understand where at the very grassroots of grassroots the opportunities needed to be supported and funded, was an excellent mechanism for delivering funding right where it needed to have an impact. There may be other mechanisms. We know that there is a large investment made through national sporting organizations by Sport Canada to try and trickle that funding down through the provincial sport organizations and sport bodies to local clubs and organizations as well. There could be a portfolio approach, quite frankly, to getting funding where it needs to be.
Thank you. I have 15 seconds. Very quickly. Do you think that everything happening in the sports federations, we've heard especially about hockey, gymnastics, Canada, do you think the loss of control in these sports federations can discourage young kids, including young girls, to do sports?
Question. And I think we need to recognize that sport happens in many more locations than just local clubs. The vast majority of organizations that we support are on the periphery of organized sport. They provide safe, welcoming, inclusive places for kids to participate. We're seeing participation in those organizations actually oversubscribed relative to some of the traditional sporting venues. But in short answer, I think there are many opportunities for kids to participate in places where they won't encounter some of the challenges that we're hearing about in more organized sporting venues.
Thank you, Dr. Dupuano. Next, Mr. Davies, please, for 2.5 minutes.
Thank you. Ms. Webb, in your written submission, the Coalition for Healthy School Food recommended that a national school nutritious meal program should provide universal access to students. Can you outline why the Coalition is advocating for universal rather than a means-tested program?
Yeah, thanks for the question. One of our big positions is that children of all socioeconomic demographics are not eating well, and that all children deserve access to healthy food at school. Many might have a long bus ride if they're in a rural community and travel a long ways to school, or their families work long hours and they can't access food, or their families don't have the budget. And so there's a wide range of reasons why children can't access food during the school day. And so the universal piece is, again, to address all students, but it's also that targeted and means-tested programs do not actually achieve the aims that they set for themselves. They have a lot of stigma attached, and it does mean that those who the program is intended for tend to refuse to participate, and the program is not as effective.
Got it. Thanks. Dr. Warshawski, the Bill C-52 would restrict food and beverage marketing directed at persons under 13 years of age, and I think you've done an excellent job explaining why children under that age are particularly vulnerable. But I'm wondering about children 14 to 18. They may not have the same vulnerability in terms of their belief systems about what they see on TV, but these are kids that have money, and they're the ones that are independently able to go purchase their foods, including junk foods. Do you have any thoughts on restricting food and beverage marketing to children, say, between 14 and 18?
We would love to see that happen. In fact, that was our initial proposal back in 2015 when we met with government. You're right about the unique vulnerabilities of adolescents. They have discretionary income, they have less supervision. They have unique drivers in terms of their social relationships. With adolescence comes a shift in affiliation from parents to peers. Peers become very, very important. There's also a need for immediate gratification, which adolescents demonstrate. So they are particularly vulnerable to marketing, and the marketing techniques of social media are increasingly directed at them. Sophisticated user-generated marketing techniques, geolocating. So they are extremely vulnerable. We would again, like to see the protection expanded to this group. And one of the things that we discussed with Health Canada, if and when, and hopefully it's going to be soon, we get the protection for kids under the age of 13, is to look to see how marketing has shifted. It could be sort of a game of whack-a-mole where you inhibit marketing to kids under the age of 12 or 13, and then all of a sudden it increases in adolescence. What happens to that marketing? What does it do to the purchasing behaviors? So first step is to get it for the younger children. Next step is to really keep an eye on what's happening with adolescents.
Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Warshawski. Next, Dr. Kitchen, please, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I thank all the witnesses for being here today and your presentations, because it's provided some valuable information. And we all know the value of physical activity in our youth and in our children. We see, as we've heard many times, the reduction in blood pressure, the decreased risk in type 2 diabetes, the increased self-esteem, the increased social aspects of things, and many of your organizations do that. And we heard also about, and we've seen here in Canada, the huge inflationary costs that we're seeing in today's world on the cost of food. And the just inflation that we're seeing is just a huge impact on it. And on top of that,
Point of order,
we've
Mr.
had
Chair.
in the last...
Yes, Mr. Vancouver, then.
I'll give my honourable member the benefit of the doubt, assuming that was a slip of the tongue, but I think it's inappropriate to use those types of terms in committee.
Point of order there?
Yeah.
I don't think that's...
There's not a point of order there.
Yeah,
This isn't the House.
Well, the same rules apply to a certain degree, but go ahead, Dr. Kitchen.
Thank you, and I assume my time is being adjusted accordingly.
Right. You are correct.
Thank you. And ultimately, what we're seeing is this huge inflationary costs, and you've mentioned some of that. What has happened, though, is that we also saw where this government changed the Canada Health Food Guide. And I spent 30 years of practice before I became an MP teaching and educating my patients, my families on the Canada Health Food Guide. And the changes that have happened are going to change drastically in many aspects of it. And those inflationary costs of the foods that they've now put on that guide are going to be a huge challenge for you, Ms. Webb, in proposing. And I'm just wondering your comments on, are you, A, following the new guide, and B, what increase in cost do you see?
Yeah, I can only speak to what I've heard from the members of our coalition, where I support the coalition rather than run programs myself. But what we've seen is that and your question specifically is, are programs following the food guide? And I'll say that it depends on the program. Some have provincial and territorial nutrition guidelines that they follow, and those are slowly being adjusted to match the food guide, and so those programs will model the food guide. I will say that COVID did create a lot of challenges for programs, especially when kids were in lockdown and at homes. Many of the programs adjusted to try to give them boxes of food in some cases, or other things that the food was often prepackaged, and many of the health restrictions at the time limited fresh whole food, and so many of the programs took a big step backwards towards processed foods, and slowly, I believe they're getting back, but many do make their best attempt to follow the food guide.
Appreciate that. Mm-hmm. On that note, then, are your organizations concerned about possible liability aspects if they don't follow the Canada Food Guide?
I haven't heard anything about liability. I've heard a lot of interest in serving kids whole, healthy foods and trying to do that wherever possible. I think one of the biggest concerns is just the lack of funding and how difficult it is sometimes to meet the needs of the food guide with such a tiny budget, 15 cents for a meal or other things to meet it in that respect. So.
Thank you. Mm-hmm. Dr. De Buono and Mr. Antunes, I appreciate your comments, and with participation as well as with Jumpstart, I've been involved and recognize the great value of it. The unfortunate part is, I think with COVID, we saw I go back to the days when participation was all on the news, and it was about that aspect of the 80-year-old Swede compared to the 30-year-old Canadian, and that information during COVID seemed to be missing. And I understand there's a lot of funding that gets out there to advertise that. I'm just wondering comments from you, Mr. Antunes, on what happened during that time frame.
Well, thank you for the question. Maybe I can refer back. I think you started off your comments by saying we value physical activity. I would challenge that, and I would say we don't value physical activity. 28% of kids are meeting national physical activity guidelines. I think we understand the benefits of physical activity, but as a society, we don't value it, because if we valued it, we would ensure that kids have the opportunities to be active every day, whether in school, at home, or in the community. And I think we really need to ensure that as a country, we really value and demonstrate that value through investment and policy. I think you talk about awareness, I think, is part of the equation. Our sector as a whole is very underfunded. Our organization, for instance, we've been around for 52 years, but we're looking at a wind-down option beyond March 31st because our funding it ends. And so we need to continue to invest in not only organizations but policies and programs that ensure that we actually value physical activity for kids wherever they are. So I would say that that's one point. I would say that the other thing with respect to COVID, it's a challenge because we ended up, most of us, ended up pivoting to virtual or online type of supports. And we did that because everybody was at home. And so we in a sense, contributed to the physical and activity issue, which is being on screens. And so I think there's some effort that needs to happen to get people back into in-person physical activity and sport programming.
Thank you, Mr. Antunes. Next, Dr. Pawlowski, please, for 5 minutes.
I wanted to take a different spin on the issue of the importance of getting kids into sports. I'm a member of Parliament for Thunder Bay, Rainy River, which includes a number of small towns like Atikokan and Fort Francis. In Thunder Bay, but particularly in those small towns, they need immigrants because they don't have enough Canadians for those jobs. Now, the problem is when immigrants come to these small communities, often they don't stay. They go on to a bigger center where there's often a bigger ethnic community, but also where there's more to do. In the small towns in the winter, if you're from some warm country, a lot of people spend a lot of their times in their houses and aren't happy. Now, that all changes when your kids get into hockey. And I know my wife came from the Philippines 15 years ago, and first of all of her friends were from the Philippines. But then two of my kids got into minor hockey, and suddenly she's an expert on hockey. She's yelling out to the ref, offside, offside. And a lot of her friends are now people from outside the Filipino community. So I think hockey is a great way of integrating people into Canadian society, giving them something to do in small towns. And I would say not just hockey, also skiing is another way. Not only is it an important activity and a way of integrating it to society, but I think getting outside is also really important. So maybe Mr. DiBuono, I know Jumpstart's done a lot in this area. How can the federal government work with organizations such as yours to get more kids involved in hockey? And if I could throw in there, besides the immigrant kids, also a lot of Indigenous kids who I think find the cost of minor hockey a real financial barrier.
It's an excellent question. Thank you. And I'd like to suggest that we should just be focusing on getting them involved in local sport and physical activity opportunities. We actually worked in partnership with the federal government in 2015-16 when a large number of Syrian refugee families came to Canada, and more recently with the influx of Afghan families over a year ago now. And throughout those experiences, we developed in collaboration with many of our partners at the local level, a best practice for how to engage with newcomer families. And I do want to insist it's families, not just the kids, so that we create the right types of environment, trauma-informed approaches to coaching and youth leadership that allow those kids to find a home and become familiarized with their new communities in a way that leads to long-term participation and potentially to those families building roots in those communities over the long term as well. We have newcomer programs in Edmonton, Winnipeg, in Surrey, BC, and all points in between throughout Atlantic Canada, and they are thriving. These kids are now integrating into more traditional forms of organized sport. There are many programs, as I mentioned earlier, on the periphery of organized sport that focus on the new Canadian experience, giving them the competency and skills to then transfer over into more typical local clubs like hockey or soccer or basketball. So what it comes down to, I would argue, is continuing to invest, as the government has, in the Community Sport for All initiative, which is the first time we are seeing a significant influx of financial resources into the very grassroots of sport, where these things matter and where the experts know how to address the needs of those kids and those families.
Mr. Antunes, do you want to add anything to that?
Well, I would say on the other side of the equation is our program leaders are also needing to ensure that programs that are offered are relevant and culturally appropriate to newcomers as well. So as much as we want to integrate people into our traditional sports, we should also be looking at ways to expand what we offer from a programming perspective to ensure that those opportunities are there for all.
Mr. Wachowski, I know a number of jurisdictions around the world have introduced taxes on sugary drinks: Mexico, France, Hungary, Finland, Norway, Belgium, Chile, Barbados, a number of jurisdictions in the United States. Now, my understanding is Newfoundland has just introduced similar legislation. Why hasn't Canada done this before? You would think we're one of the more progressive countries in the world. Has it been because of the lobbying of the industry that's prevented this happening?
I think in part it's industry lobbying, but also there's a natural hesitation for government to increase taxes. That's worldwide. We've met with various levels of government, both provincially and federally, over the last decade to advocate for this step. In British Columbia, we were successful in persuading the government to remove an exemption on provincial sale tax that sugary beverages enjoyed. And I think the next step is to try to get something like this implemented either at a federal level or at multiple provincial levels. So I'd like to see it happen. I welcome your advice on how to move this forward.
Thank you, Dr. Warshawski. Next, Mr. Viersen, please, for 5 minutes.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chair, and I want to thank the witnesses for being here today. I'm going to direct my questions to Marco and Leo. Just around participation in sports, how much does our general sense of security impact that? I just think about my growing up and heading over to the local hockey rink and being there all afternoon. That doesn't seem. I see the baseball diamonds are empty now during the after school hours. It was not organized when I was a kid. We showed up with a ball and a glove and played baseball. And I sense that there's this. While statistically, the police keep coming to our community and saying our community is as safe as ever, the general sense of security seems to be diminished. And does that show up in your analysis and research at all, Marco?
So safety is one of the barriers that is articulated by youth directly, but it is by no means the number one barrier that they express. So generally, cost is one that comes out on top. Feelings of self-confidence for girls and young women come in at number 2 or number 3, and the list goes on. Safety is there, but it is by no means the number one concern that kids articulate. And quite honestly, transportation trumps that even. Lack of facilities, lack of equipment, those all factor much higher on the list of things that are keeping kids from participating within their communities.
Leo? Yeah, I would agree. It's actually a perceived safety issue because the research is clear from a physical activity perspective anyway in communities. There isn't an increase in safety issues, but certainly because of media the way it is now, we're just more aware of issues when they do happen, and therefore I think it's more of a perceived safety issue. I would also say that we have to work with the municipal leaders because sometimes they implement policies that actually work against getting kids more active in their communities, like banning street hockey or banning tobogganing. So there are many different local bylaws that actually prevent kids from being physically active. When you talk about baseball fields being empty, we need to ensure that there's strong partnerships between the municipality and the education system because they both have facilities. Many times schools can't access municipal facilities during the day when they're empty, and vice versa. Municipalities can't access school facilities in the evenings when they're empty. And so we need to do a better job of creating kind of a whole community approach to ensuring that physical activity and sport are available to all.
Dr. Ellis.
Thank you very much, Arnold, and thank you, Chair. Thank you to the witnesses being here. Mr. Antunes, I just had a quick question for you, if I might. I think maybe I misheard you, but did you say your funding for the entire program of participation is ending on the 31st of March, or is it in jeopardy of ending?
Yes, it's ending at this point in time.
And are you in active negotiations with the government with respect to that?
Well, we're advocating for funding like many other organizations, and based on the way the funding programs are, our point of origin for funding advocacy is through the budget process, and so we've been working hard, speaking to many of your colleagues around support for renewed funding for us. Yes.
Thank you very much, and through you, Chair, if I might just continue with that. And participation has been around how long now?
52 years.
So 52 years as an entity, and I would say described as Canada's premier physical activity brand, and certainly I would say around this table something everybody's familiar with, but is in danger of ending abruptly.
That's correct.
Wow, okay, shocking. I guess the question that I would have then is what do you think the implications of that are on Canada's youth in particular and Canadians in general? It's a big question, I realize. We only have a few not minutes, right, Chair? A few seconds left, but if you could encapsulate that.
Well, I mean, as I mentioned in my remarks, to address this issue requires the support of many different organizations. Participation alone can't solve the physical inactivity crisis, but we play an important part along with our various partners. Our focus has been to keep this issue at the forefront of not only policy makers' minds, but also with Canadians as a whole, to ensure that we motivate them and support them to be physically active. We talked a lot about sport here, but our whole organization's focus is around getting people just to move more. And move more for the sake of movement. And if they move more and adopt a healthier lifestyle and more active, healthier lifestyle, then they're more inclined to participate in sport programs and possibly even more inclined to eat more healthy. And so our whole focus is around active, healthy living and ensuring that people have the opportunities and the support to overcome the barriers that prevent them from being more active on a daily basis.
Thank you, Mr. Antunes.
If I may add one additional point, there is an economic argument to be made here as well. A coalition of concerned stakeholders from the sport, physical activity, and recreation community in the greater Calgary area published a report in 2020 showing that the economic activity directly attributable to sport, physical activity, and recreation within Calgary alone equaled $3.2 billion annually and was accountable for 43,000 jobs. So if we see declining rates continue amongst adults and children, we also have major economic impact and jobs impact that will ensue. So I think if you're not buying the health benefits and the social benefits of sport, physical activity, and recreation, there is a strong economic argument to be made as well.
Mr. Joe Harry, please, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and welcome to all the witnesses today. I've had the opportunity to meet with various organizations over last year. Specifically, I met with Adam, you okay? No, that's okay. Just wanted to make sure you're okay. No worries, especially with participation. We met on December 6th, and we had a very fruitful conversation, and I can assure you that this side of the House and with my colleagues, we are definitely supportive of the support that the organization needs. And in that meeting, we talk about looking at the whole of a government approach, if you recall. Just want to build on the line of questioning that my colleague, Dr. Ellis, started. Give you about a minute to talk about when we had that conversation, you broadened rather than just economic and health, you also highlight the impact, positive impact that funding will bring to the organization and to not only to the government but to the whole society in a much broader sense.
Yes, I mean, I think I've mentioned physical inactivity levels are 28%, down 11% from pre-pandemic. So we weren't doing a great job with kids and their physical activity before the pandemic. It's even worse now. And so for all the things that I've just said about, active kids are healthier kids, they're happier kids, they do better in school. But there is a strong, strong economic argument when we talk about healthcare costs down the road. The challenge with physical activity is I can't show the implications today. The implications are 10, 20 years from now. And I think we, as policymakers and as leaders, we need to think about the future of our country from a healthcare perspective. If we don't get Canadians, people living in Canada, more active, we're going to pay for it down the road. So we can invest now into programs and policies and approaches that encourage and support people to get active, or we'll have to pay for it from a healthcare perspective down the road. So there is a strong argument there. I think the other thing I would say is that we're falling behind on an international scale. Canada prides itself on being leaders, and our organization works with 58 other countries in monitoring physical activity for children and youth, and we're ranked 28 out of the 58 countries. And they're all using our report card format. So they leverage our insights, our thought leadership, but many of them have implemented policies that have generated significant results, and we're further falling behind. And so I would suggest that out of international pride, we need to do better as a country.
Thank you. With about 2 minutes and some seconds left, I'd like to go to Ms. Webb. In the written submission to the committee, under the section, the National School Nutrition Meal Program for Canada, you highlighted that 2 ministers have been mandated to develop a national school nutrition meal program. And in your preamble to the recommendation, you talked about investing in a cost-shared universal healthy school food program, and then you made a request of about $1 billion over 5 years, which is roughly about $200 million per year. One of the very interesting area was what the number of recommendations that you had made. There were 7 recommendations specifically, and with whatever time I'm left, would you like to take that opportunity to quickly go through those 7 recommendations and at least get it verbally on the record as well as written? Floor is yours, ma'am.
Thank you very much. And where to start? The coalition has 8 guiding principles that we have asked for a national school food program to follow, and those are that a program would be health promoting, so in line with Canada's food guide, that it would be universal and so accessible to all students. And I'm not sure if these are the specific recommendations that you're touching on, but yeah, the cost shared aspect is that many provinces and territories already fund these programs, and so let's bring all together so that we can have a well-funded program that can actually meet the needs of students. And then we're also encouraging programs to be flexible so that they can meet the needs and build on what already exists in communities, because so much is happening. But it would be, a shame to impose any one-size-fits-all aspect. We're asking for programs in Indigenous communities to be controlled by Indigenous communities, and for those to be well-funded and sustainably well-funded. We're also asking for programs to really consider school food targets, because there's so many economic benefits that can come from local procurement. There's so many opportunities for food literacy. Really following the food guide, engaging students in developing some of those food skills can last a lifetime. They really can impact families. Kids can bring home those food skills and ask to cook foods that they've experienced in the programs and learn budgeting skills. And then we're also asking for programs to have strong evaluation as well as not market to children and have conflict of interest standards. So thank you for the opportunity to expand.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Ms. Webb. Suite Monsieur Garon pour 2 minutes et
Mr. Garon, 2.5 minutes. Thank you very much. A question for Mr. Antunes. I think we talk very little of municipalities, but cities, municipalities do have responsibility for developing sports infrastructure and seeing to it that those facilities be accessible, free of charge to families. It's a public good. There are many infrastructure funding programs where there's negotiations that are difficult between federal government and provinces. Would you be in favor of better funding of municipal infrastructure, making those accessible to families?
Absolutely. I think when we talk about delivering sport and physical activity, all three levels of government need to work in collaboration. I think the federal government has a strong leadership role to play, but certainly a lot of the programs and facilities are controlled by municipalities. Yes, and I think there are a number of infrastructure granting programs that have been provided to municipalities. I would say, though, that doesn't go far enough. For instance, we just invested in significant active transportation infrastructure. That money went directly to local municipalities to create trails and bike lanes. The challenge is, if we don't support that with strong social marketing and communications and changing the social norms towards active transportation, that infrastructure will get built but not used. And so we need to build infrastructure, but we also need to get people to utilize that infrastructure. And that's where I think a federal government could play a strong role in support of what the municipalities do.
Merci beaucoup.
Thank you very much. Ms. Webb, I've read your brief. You talk about 200 million additional in money, and that this be said to schools. And I mean, in Quebec, it's illegal for a public school to receive funds directly from the federal government. And by the way, I really love your mission. I wonder, what approaches have you experimented with, and what relations have you developed with the government of Quebec so that we can foster this Quebec policy? Because it's only recently that the Quebec nation was recognized.
You've touched on a couple of points. I mean, I'll speak to the infrastructure funding. We have asked for, funding for infrastructure because school facilities, many are not built without kitchens or facilities for growing food. And so we have said that a possible grants fund or infrastructure funding from some other places that could support schools would be quite important too. You can do some simple retrofits in some cases that would enable a lot more cooking. You can't prepare whole healthy food in a school itself if you don't have a space to actually chop vegetables and whatnot. And so that is a big piece and could be given direct, through grants, either to organizations like the Local Food Infrastructure Fund or through other mechanisms. And then I believe your other question was about how we've worked with the Quebec government. And there is La Collectif is a chapter of the coalition at the Quebec level, and they have been in discussions with the provincial government about accepting federal funds and also about developing and supporting the programs that do exist in the province. And so, yeah.
Thank you, Ms. Webb. Mr. Davies, please, for 2.5 minutes.
Thank you. Ms. Webb, I believe in the last federal election, both Liberals and the NDP made an election pledge of spending $1 billion, I believe, over 4 or 5 years to establish a school nutrition program. We're on the verge of making a budget for 2023. Do you have any indication that the current Liberal government is going to honor that promise?
As you said, the NDP committed $1 billion over 4 years, and Liberal government committed $1 billion over 5 years. In the discussions that we've had, folks keep saying they're committed to this issue and are very keen. I wish we had a crystal ball, but we're just fighting hard. We're speaking with whoever we can, but we don't.
So you haven't seen any of that money yet?
We haven't seen the money.
Okay.
We haven't had any firm commitment. And we're, as I said, we're speaking to whoever we can and really just hoping that it can flow soon because programs really need these funds.
Right.
Yeah.
Dr. Wachowski, you made a comment in your opening remarks about obesity, childhood obesity costing us $7 billion a year. I hate to put this in economic terms because these are our children, Canadian children, and one would think that making sure that we're taking steps that keep them healthy is obviously the top consideration. But I'm just wondering, in terms of our healthcare system that's been under such pressure lately, were we to implement a lot of these sort of obesity fighting measures, stop the marketing to children, better physical activity, better nutrition, et cetera, what would be the economic impact of that, say, a generation down the road?
Well, thanks for the question. It is conjecture. However, University of Waterloo did a study looking at the tax, or rather the financial benefits of implementing a tax on sugar-sweetened beverages. And I don't have the study in front of me, but it seems to me it was close to roughly $1 billion per year over 25 years in healthcare cost savings because of the role of excess sugar in the diet. So the benefits will be there, absolutely. The cost benefit analysis, I think, is pretty clear that is certainly in our collective benefits to reduce the incidence of childhood overweight and obesity and to improve nutrition as well as physical activity.
Thanks, Mr. Antunes. It seems to me that if we were serious about this as a country, we would just make sure that in every school in this country, there was 60 minutes of physical activity every day for every child from 6 to 18. I know that's provincial jurisdiction, but is that something that we should be doing as a country?
Yes, absolutely. I think schools need to implement quality daily physical education, and I think we need to value physical education and physical activity like we do math and science. And and all of the other core subjects, absolutely. But I would suggest, though, that we have to support schools in the community to ensure that there are programs that are accessible for kids in their communities as well. And we have to ensure that the families in their homes also value physical activity, so that wherever the child is, at school, in the community, or in the home, they're supported with those values of physical activity being important to your overall health and well-being. But certainly schools have a significant role to play.
Thank you, Mr. Antunes. Dr. Ellis, please, for 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Chair. And I apologize, Dr. Warshawski. I came in when you were speaking originally, but I just wondered what exactly you were saying around food literacy in children. I wasn't exactly sure what you said. It's not helpful, or it's not proven to be beneficial. Perhaps you could comment on that.
Correct. So there are a number of jurisdictions which looked at improving food literacy and the impact of those didactic sessions on behavior. And I would say that they're not non-existent, but they're dwarfed by the power of marketing that kids are subjected to. If you look at, the budget for marketing and healthy foods and beverages to kids of over $1 billion per year, sophisticated marketing spokespersons, sports people, cartoon characters. It's pervasive. It's all the way through internet, social media, billions of views per year in social media. It's a cannon compared to the pop gun of media literacy.
So that doesn't mean it doesn't work. That perhaps means that there's not enough resources. Because, I mean, to me, the obvious question would be, is if we don't actually teach children food literacy, in the vernacular, what they should eat and what they shouldn't, how are they ever going to make good choices? I guess that's part of the issue.
Well, I think it should be taught. However, I don't think we should rely upon that to really have a substantive change in eating patterns for children. Part of it is the neurobiology of kids, neurocognitive perceptions, the organ of thought of the brain, the area of the prefrontal cortex, that doesn't fully develop until age 10 or age 20 to 25. In children, especially under the 12, that's relatively underdeveloped. We also talked about the role of emotion, the role of memory in children. So yes, I think that it's important to give consistent messaging around appropriate food choices. However, it's not a reliable tool to substantively change their nutrition patterns.
Well, thank you very much for that, Dr. Warshawski. I mean, clearly, though, we need a multitude of tools because we are not winning at the current time. This significant issue is continuing to get worse. I wonder if you could comment a bit. Certainly in the United States, the American Academy of Pediatrics has taken a very different view on childhood obesity and the treatment thereof, advocating for things like bariatric surgery and use of medications in children over 12. Could you comment a bit on that and how that might fit into a Canadian model, if it does at all?
If you look at the key action statements around the AAP recommendations, they don't differ significantly from what's been recommended in Canada. It talks about monitoring, detecting early departure from healthy weight trajectories. When that's detected, to have a conversation about fundamental behavioral changes. That's nutrition, that's physical activity. It's looking at stigma, it's looking at mental health. Those are the bedrock foundations. They also talk about, I don't want to go with too much doctor jargon here, but looking for comorbidities, looking for things like hypertension, high blood lipids, looking for sleep apnea, that sort of thing. All those are common both north and south of the border. What's getting a lot of publicity is the recommendations around pharmacological interventions and also around bariatric surgery. I think that my own perspective on this, and I think the Canadian practice guidelines will also reflect this, is those are important steps for our adolescents who are really suffering from, say, type 2 diabetes, hypertension, metabolic syndrome, those sort of things. That is kind of a last-ditch effort. With the promising advent of the GLP analogs, the Wegovy, Ozempic, that sort of thing, to me, that would be an opportunity for healthcare providers to intervene not with an irrevocable step like bariatric surgery, but with pharmacology. But that's down the road. I think, as I did mention earlier in my comments, the unique aspect of Canada compared to the US is that we do have a chance for some significant regulatory interventions on a national level. Restricting the marketing of unhealthy foods and beverages to kids will help diminish the consumption of these products, which are strongly linked with overweight and obesity. Taxing sugar-sweetened beverages can be done on a national level. We have a progressive mindset here. Physical activity can be increased as well on a national level. So I think there's things that we can do upstream to hopefully decrease the need for something as drastic as bariatric surgery.
Thank you, Dr. Warshawski. Next, Mr. Van Koeverden, please, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. My first question is for participation. I'm on my way to some FPT meetings representing the Minister of Health in Prince Edward Island, around the Canada Games, and one of the things that we're focused on with our provincial and territorial ministerial counterparts is physical activity. Can I ask, does participation have any significant bilateral agreements with provinces and territories? And if not, would those potentially help implement ambitions like daily physical activity in schools?
We currently have funding relationships with the Government of Newfoundland and Government of Saskatchewan. We did have a long-standing relationship with the BC Ministry of Health, but that has ended and was not renewed. There was a change of government there a few years ago. So, yes, we do have a couple. We work with all of the provincial and territorial governments from a collaboration and sharing of information, but from a funding relationship perspective, it's those two right now. We as an organization need to be very careful because they also fund provincial level organizations, and so we want to make sure that any type of funding we get at a provincial government level, we're not taking away from some of our partner organizations, because as I said, we're very under-resourced as a whole. So that's one of the balancing acts, if you will, that we always have to be mindful of.
Thanks, very, very helpful. Dr. Warshawski on the Zoom, how does sort of the nature of marketing and the profit margins or the business of sweet, salty, and fatty foods sort of prey on our most prevalent biases towards those foods? I'm kind of asking you like a bit of an anthropological question, I suppose, because we as humans obviously have like an evolutionary bias towards those foods, and how does those big companies like chip and chocolate and sweet beverage companies, how do they prey on that?
Well, I also have an evolutionary bias, so I believe in evolutionary medicine. And I would say that the food industry doesn't set out to harm anyone. What they do is they engineer food products that are attractive, that are savory, they're sweet. So we do have an evolutionary bias to want to maximize caloric intake, we have an attracted mouth feel to fat products and also to salt, because through most of human history, those substances haven't been readily available. There's a great book by Moore called Salt, Sugar, Fat, which talks about how the food industry engineers, and this is just kind of think good business. They have focus groups. They try different formulations of, say, potato chips, and the ones with just the right amount of salt, sugar, and fat, great mouthfeel that people say this is great. They market that, and I'm actually a chipaholic. I can't resist those products, so I try not to have them in the house except for weekends.
I hear you.
It works. It's done very well.
I hear you. Sorry to cut you off. I hear you. I like chips too, and I've noticed that with the rising cost of food, bags of chips are still $1.50 in my grocery store, and they haven't gotten much more expensive. I'm going to move on to Canadian Tire Jumpstart. Dr. Buono, you mentioned the Community Sport for All initiative. Could you highlight some specific examples of interventions that have helped achieve some of the goals set out by the organization through the CSAI program?
We may need to extend the meeting by a couple of hours. So in our case, we were a beneficiary of close to $7 million of Community Sport for All funding, which we matched, and were able to reach almost 2,000 organizations across the country. So examples of that, programming in the Calgary area that uses skateboarding as a tool to help young Indigenous youth overcome the intergenerational trauma of residential schools. Programming for Indigenous girls and young women in the Lower Mainland, a fantastic group called All My Relations, using basketball as a tool to support Indigenous culture and also to improve physical activity and recreation. I mentioned newcomer programs earlier. We have them all across the country. Whether it's hockey for newcomer youth or programming like the Free Play Society in Edmonton that has a trauma-informed approach to welcoming newcomer families as well as the kids into their facilities. The list goes on and on and on. Sport as a tool with an intersectional lens has the power to help kids reach their full potential, and we've done that for this past year. Thanks to the support we received, almost over 440,000 youth across Canada.
Thank you, Dr. Bruno, for getting that 2 hours into a minute and a half. Very, very well done. Dr. Kitchen, please, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I appreciate that. And I apologize to you, Mr. Antunes, if I maybe missed this. The 2020 report card that you put out basically states that Canadians' children and youth is a D+, was from 2020. My understanding it's a D now, which makes me say that there's another report, 2022, perhaps. I've not seen that. I'm just wondering if that is, and if you can either table it to us or share that with us, I'd appreciate that.
Yes, we do have a 2022 report card, and I did actually provide it to the clerk, but it hasn't been distributed yet, but we can certainly do that post-meeting, yes.
Thank you very much. Much appreciated. On that note, I am aware that, the basic participation was given $4.6 million for the community challenge, or basically for the community challenge at all. And then also, I understand, Dr. De Bruno, that Jumpstart got $6.8 million. And I just happened to have had a look at the budget, and I noticed, and when I look at the Community Challenge report, you talk about the available grants are $800, $5,000 grants. Doing the quick math, that's $4 million. Is the administration charges to do this then $600,000?
Funding program, the intent was to provide as much of that funding to local organizations for programming. And so we were limited, I believe, to 15% for administrative and operational and programming costs. So out of the $4.6 million that participation received, $4 million will be going directly to the hands of local organizations, yes.
Thank you. And Dr. De Bruno, your administration costs then would be?
Virtually nil. We're in the unique position of having all of our administrative expenses covered by Canadian Tire Corporation. We did, in the interest of making sure that that money got out as quickly as possible, use a small portion to bring one staff member on so that we could expedite the delivery of funding. But we've since rolled that staff member into our general ledger and include that in our general admin expenses that the corporation covers generously.
Thank you very much. Much appreciated. A lot of what you've talked about and the organizations involved in getting to specialized groups and getting the funding out to groups that are challenged. One that I'm very passionate about is the Special Olympics and the tremendous work they do with athletes with intellectual disabilities and our children and youth in that aspect of things. And as you've indicated, we look at things where the value of sport has increased their confidence, their self-esteem, their knowledge, their camaraderie and their friendships, all on top of the physical activity that's there. And they get basically $6.6 million per year across the country to do this. Have you partnered with the Special Olympics at all or looked at that? And for either one of you, if you can comment on that, to assisting them as well along this means.
I can certainly speak to that. We have funded and continue to fund many of the Special Olympics chapters across the country for specific programming. We've provided some grants to many of the chapters to help the younger participants travel to some of the national events that have thankfully gotten resumed since prior to the pandemic. So it is an ongoing relationship we have across the country. I couldn't tell you specifically the amount, but would be happy to provide that information after the meeting to the clerk.
Thank you very much. And Mr. Antunes, yes or no?
Specifically to the Community Sport for All initiative, those applications are in our hands now, and we're assessing those. And that money will be going out the door within the next few weeks. So I can't tell you exactly what we have funded, but certainly we have a long-standing relationship with Special Olympics, and I would not be surprised if they were part of the funding pool.
Thank you, and I appreciate it because that encourages me that if they had taken the steps to apply for that they at least would be considered, and I do appreciate that. So thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Kitchen. The last round of questions for today's meeting will come from Dr. Hanley, please. 5 minutes.
Thank you. And I have to begin again with Dr. Wojciechowski. Just as a fellow chipaholic, I wanted to also point out a book that really changed my perspective substantially by David Kessler, similar to, it's called The End of Overeating, but it refers to that toxic combination of sugar, salt, and fat. But we know that we need fat and we need salt in our diets, absolutely. I don't think we need sugar, though. Is there any health benefit, apart from perhaps the pain-relieving properties in early childhood that it could be used for, but is there any health benefit to sugar or refined carbohydrates?
I'm not aware of any, other than the fact that it's a quick source of energy, and that can be debated. I'm sure Adam Van Koverman can talk about what's best to fuel your body through sports. But as we did talk about from an evolutionary point of view, for most of human evolution, it's really important to get calories in as quickly as possible, and that's why we've probably developed a taste for it, not because of the utility of it. And in fact, there's some conjecture, that sugars may fuel cancer growth and other things, not to mention its effect on promoting type 2 diabetes, hypertension, things like that. So I would say no, but small amounts of sugar are important. I mean, life, you want to have some fun. It adds flavor to things. So in moderation, I think sugar is fine. The problem is in the modern food environment, 66% of processed foods have added sugar. That's not necessary. That's not healthful.
Yeah, thank you. And that's a great way to describe it. And I think we need to get better at how we communicate the adverse effect of refined carbohydrates in our communications, in our food policy, in our labeling, all of that. But I also wanted to turn to Mr. Dubuano. You would know that in Whitehorse, not long ago, we participated in an opening of an accessible and a beautiful playground that was funded through Jumpstart. Knowing how important playgrounds are, in addition to other forums for physical activity, but each of these does come with a cost. So when we think again of what can we do as a federal government to help remove financial barriers, what can we be doing more? Maybe a chance at the end of this meeting to talk about how we enhance accessibility, particularly recognizing rural Canada, winter conditions, equity-deserving groups, Indigenous, racialized minorities. Maybe some top things that we can be doing to enhance accessibility.
That's an excellent question, and my short answer is to really engage communities and get them to provide input as to what their needs are, and not to make assumptions. So I think, as an example, when we approached the community in Whitehorse, we asked for their input in the design, into the location, into the size of the play space that we were going to, we wanted to offer. They had alternatives. They could have considered multi-sport courts. They could have considered skate parks and so on. It really, we've advocated that everything we do from a sport, physical activity, and recreation lens has to be from the ground up. It has to involve the children and youth. And my plea to this committee is to ensure that we hear their voices before we implement any policy, before we create any change, before we mandate any kind of systemic, changes to the way we try to address all of these important topics. We need to listen to their voices. They are smarter, they are more articulate, and they are more knowledgeable about their needs than we give them credit for. And we have been very successful in listening to those voices to create significant and tangible positive change for those children.
I think I might have 15 seconds left. Mr. Antunes, anything to add to that?
I'll let that stand. I think that's very well said.
Thank you, Dr. Hanley. Your last 12 seconds are going to go to Dr. Pawlowski.
I think that today is the last day for our friend Jean-Denis and this committee. Yes, most likely. So I'll take 3 of the 12 seconds to greet you all and to say what a pleasure it's been to work with you on this committee. And I want to thank Jean-Denis for being a good colleague on this committee, and thank you very much. It's unanimous.
Merci, Jean-Denis.
Thank you, Jean-Denis.
This has been an absolutely fascinating couple of hours. Thank you so much for being with us. It seems to me intuitive that we all know that physical activity and healthy eating and marketing to kids, it's clear what side we need to be on. But the depth to which you went and the way that you communicated these points will be extremely helpful in the drafting of the report, and we're grateful to you. Is it the will of the committee to adjourn the meeting? We're adjourned.
Thank you.